the biggest story we've been tracking since yesterday, which is Apple's threat alerts sent out to various opposition party leaders as well as academics, journalists. Government says it's now starting a probe and wants Apple to cooperate.
Absolutely, and I think Apple has to cooperate. There is no way that this probe can be initiated or can be concluded without Apple really laying its card out open. I think it is imperative to understand that while Apple in its own statement has said that it does not want to disclose the algorithm it uses to detect state-sponsored attacks. And what are these state-sponsored? We'll just come to that also. But I think in a closed inquiry, it is absolutely imperative that Apple lays out its cards face open, telling very clearly where did the trigger come from, what were the hack attempts, be able to detect the location, the IP address of the device used to try and intrude into those phones which have received this threat notification, and at the same time help as quickly as possible arrive at the identity of the potential hackers, as they are perhaps in this case. Now, how does Apple define state-sponsored attacks versus cybercrime?
Right.
I think Apple very clearly mentions in its support page, and this was a link that I was referred to after I had written to Apple India MD Virat Bhatia yesterday, and that very clearly defines that a cybercrime is an activity in which a small group of people, perhaps not well funded, is carpet bombing, going after a large section of the population, hoping that it will be able to net at least a few, and extort or use them for whatever gains that unethical gains that they desire. Whereas in the case of state-sponsored attacks, Apple's definition is that this is an attack which is well funded and is targeted only to a few number of select individuals. Now, in its statement, after we had sent a query to Apple yesterday, in its statement, Apple said that it does not attribute this to any specific state.
Okay.
So, I think a lot of questions unanswered. Question number one, how do you define clearly that when you say this is state-sponsored, what do you mean by state-sponsored? I mean, you could have a well-funded non-state organization funding a few individuals to go after a few individuals. So, specifically, how do you as a company say that this is state sponsored attack, and how do you specify and how do you detect which is the state which is after these individuals? Number one. Number two, algorithm. If not, we understand, it is IP, it is something that may embolden hackers further if Apple comes out publicly and states the algorithm it uses and the logic on which the algorithm is built. But that aside, I think in a private investigation, it has to lay out its algorithm and help agencies and help investigators understand exactly how a few individuals get targeted in a large population. And then, of course, I mean, is this, if this is indeed a state-sponsored, whichever state in question, if this is state-sponsored, then is this a select handful number of individuals only, or are there more people that whichever state in question here is likely to go after?
Okay, so here's what we know so far. Certain individuals primarily belonging to opposition parties, including TMC, INC, have been targeted. Their phones, or there was an attempt made on their phones to hack into their data, and a notification was sent out, which when shared on Twitter, had quite a few details. Number one, that it is a state-sponsored attack or a state-sponsored attacker. Number two, these people were targeted because of who they are.
That's right.
And what they do.
That's right. So let's read this specifically. So the alert, the subject of the alert said state-sponsored attackers may be targeting your phone. The subject says Apple believes you are being targeted by state-sponsored attackers who are trying to remotely compromise the iPhone associated with your Apple ID. These attackers are likely targeting you individually because of who you are or what you do. If your device is compromised by a state-sponsored attacker, they may be able to remotely access your sensitive data, communications, or even the camera and microphone. While it's possible this is a false alarm, please take this warning seriously.
Okay.
So, I think another clarification coming in Apple's message to us, suggesting that sometimes these could be false alarms, sometimes these could be inaccurate revelations coming by way of the system triggering alarms on the basis of its assumption, and sometimes these could be completely, misdirected in nature as well.
Okay, from state-sponsored, the classic dictionary definition is when it is sponsored by either a group of people who belong to the state. In this case, there could be a state agency, a state essentially could be central government, or could be other governments in other states.
Could
but
be
it's
another
a
country,
very,
could be,
very serious charge.
It is no doubt a very serious charge, and I think the fact that a select number of individuals who are not part of the sitting government in India have received this trigger, have received this threat notification. Obviously, a very, very thorough probe investigation needs to be done, and needs to be done fast. And for this, both Government of India and Apple have to collaborate. And I think the real question hanging in the air is going to be about the objectivity of the report and who's going to put that final stamp of approval. Should it be the CAG? Should it be CERT-In? Should it be the nodal body which is which goes after cybercrime, or should it be some other private investigative agency? But I think who gives that stamp on approval on the final report as and when it gets investigated and concluded and released is something which is going to define how objectively, if at all, the investigation was done.
All right, and IT Minister Ashwini Vaishnaw also spoke to the media asking for Apple's cooperation. Let's quickly listen into that conversation.
Friends, these compulsive critics, they have only one habit. Whenever they don't have any major issue, the only thing they'll say is surveillance. This they have tried few years back. We conducted a proper investigation. The matter was supervised by the Honorable Judiciary also. Nothing came out of that investigation, including Ms. Priyanka Gandhi Vadra. She said that her 2 children's phones were hacked, but nothing of that sort had actually happened. So this is a falsehood that some compulsive critics are trying to spread. They want to distract the country, they want to distract the people from the progress that the country is making under Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji's leadership.
All right, IT Minister saying this is a distraction. Not a distraction for sure. It is an important allegation, one that needs to be probed further.
So I think, both opposition as well as ruling government are calling this a distraction of sorts. Rahul Gandhi alleging that this is a distraction ploy by the government of India, by the Modi government, because the Adani issue is being raked up by Rahul Gandhi and the INC. And at the same time, Ashwini Vaishnaw there saying that, this is a detraction by the opposition, which is Congress in this case. I think, to just conclude, it is absolutely imperative. I mean, political jibes will keep happening anytime any issue of national interest rakes up. And remember, we are heading into election season. So I think it is critical that an independent probe is quickly initiated. It has been initiated, it has been ordered, and it has to reach some sort of a conclusion and be released at the earliest.
All right, a probe, of course, needed on that matter. We'll keep tracking all those details.